Notes for yesterday on your website, bootcamp17s2.fretless.com. Week 3, Firebase day. There's a little bit about the database rules. Yeah, that makes wrong. Rules. So by default, recall, it just says you must be authorized. But notice in the notes here, you can also apply rules per endpoint. It doesn't just have to be this global rule set. So you could say, okay, for emails, there are different rules. Everyone can read, but only certain people can write. And look at this example. You can use variables in here. So you can specify that under the user's endpoint in Firebase, for an endpoint that is a user ID, this variable that we're making up here, you can only read and write that if auth.uid equals that particular user ID. So we could use that to be extra sure that nobody can read anyone else's notes. Again, that will be enforced at the database level, not just at the application level. So that might not be a bad idea. And it looks like it's pretty easy to do. So this is under the database section again. Under rules. Oops, wherever that is. So inside rules, we just put another key. $sign user ID, which is another object. And we can just set it just like this. Under there, .read, auth not equal null, and auth.uid equals the user ID that is this key. Now, of course, it doesn't know user ID from anything else. So if we actually had more than one type of data under here, and some of it weren't scoped by user, we would probably need to change the design of our database. We could have that notes key at the top and then the user ID and do it that way. Just change the way the endpoint works. And do the same for write. This is actual JSON, no trailing comma. Rules published. Now, because we're enforcing it at the application level, we hope to actually see no visible change. Okay, so there's no visible change. But if you wanted to test this, what you could do is actually look at your data, find another user ID that has some notes, copy and paste that and hard code it as the ID of your endpoint that you're syncing with, and it shouldn't work. You just plain should not be able to do that. So now we're enforcing that at the database level. And I said that might, like it doesn't know, for example, that notes here, it's going to interpret notes as a user ID now. And it's not going to let anybody read that because no one has a UID of notes. Now that's old, out-of-date data, so that's not really a problem. But if we had other kind of stuff that weren't scoped by user, if there were anything completely publicly readable, then we would have to add some more rules, or we would need to change the structure of our data a little bit, which wouldn't be very hard. All we would have to do is change that one line in app where we start syncing, and just change this to say if I just said notes/UID instead of UID/notes, the fact that that endpoint doesn't exist already isn't a problem. It would create it as soon as I start typing. Except now it's going to be looking for a UID of notes, right? So our rule would need to change with it. In that case, we would have notes, colon, and then all of this would be underneath that. Get it? It doesn't matter that now this is at a user ID key instead of a notes key, because we still explicitly tell it which thing from notes to sync with it, right? The fact that the endpoints were named the same thing, that didn't make any impact. We could have named it whatever we wanted. So if we change it this way, obviously our old data is no longer accessible, but as soon as we start saving, then if we look at our data, and we actually re-authenticate so that it starts syncing to a different point, right? So we hadn't run sync state since then. Oh, come on. This is the right code base, right? I'm looking at the right Firebase, right? Oh, this is a totally different, what? Oh, you know what? No, I'm writing to the afternoons database right now because base.js, remember, is not committed to the repo. And of course I changed base.js for them. So right now we're actually writing to to this database. So now you see notes and under there a key for my user. So if I change the rules here, hopefully that would still work. So I can try that real quick. And then I'll change it back so that we don't screw up their example. Rules published. Let's log out and back in, make sure I can still read my own notes. Reauthorization is required. I can still read these. So again, this is documented pretty well on the notes for yesterday, and it's documented pretty darn well in Firebase's very good, very readable documentation. So the only thing I changed here in my actual code is sync to a different endpoint. Sync notes to a different Firebase endpoint. Which I did because otherwise our rules would need to be a little wacky.